Rook's porch shook under my boots as a huge polar bear stepped from the trees. Her jaws clamped around a limp white cub, while my dog slid between us and the ice-bright clearing. Rook's body formed a living shield. Muscles tight. Eyes not on me but on her, as if he knew this moment would cost us more than scratched paint or bent rules. To understand why he chose to stand there instead of run, we have to go back to the quiet days when the bay still felt distant and harmless. Snow squeaked under my boots as I crossed the short path from my cabin to the tool shed. Coffee steaming in one hand, Ranger's leash in the other. The Malinois was usually glued to my heel at this hour, already anticipating our first loop around the bay. Today, his paw prints looped frantic circles around the porch, like head spent the whole night pacing the rail. Nose pointed toward the frozen water, waiting for something I couldn't see. Out beyond the spruces, the sky above the bay was just starting to pale. A thin orange seam stitched along the horizon behind grey ice. I heard gulls, the distant cough of Hank's old truck on the road into town. And, under all of it, Ranger's low, uneasy whine drifting from behind the cabin. Up here, a dog that broke routine usually meant weather, or wildlife, or trouble walking in on 4 silent paws, dragging the wild behind it. He burst from behind the shed with a spray of powder, fur dusted white, tail high and rigid. Instead of rocketing straight to his bowl, Ranger cut across me, chest square, nudging my legs until I took a step back toward the porch. His ears were pinned, eyes not on me but on the dark tree line beyond the slope, where the untouched snow lay smooth as porcelain waiting for the first crack, the kind that never stays small once it starts. I don't see a thing. Buddy, I muttered, squinting into the trees until my eyes watered. A light north wind stung my cheeks, carrying wood smoke from town and the faint metallic smell of the sea under the ice. No ravens clacked. No snow machines grumbled on the trail. No chainsaws chewed at firewood. Just Ranger, breathing hard at my side. Muscles coiled like head, heard a door slam somewhere out in the white and was bracing for it to swing open again. The kettle shrieked from inside, a sharp whistle that sliced through the quiet like a small alarm. Ranger flinched, then trotted to the door, pausing twice to glance back over his shoulder at the bay as if he hated turning his back on it. Inside, his toys were still lined in their perfect row on the rug, the way he always left them. But his blanket in the corner was twisted and clawed like head fought ghosts all night instead of sleeping off yesterday's work. While I silenced the kettle, my phone buzzed against the counter. A text from Carla at Wildlife blinked on the screen. Early tracks reported near town. Probably bear. Keep dog close. We may need you on call. Bears showed up every winter, but something in the way Ranger had been pacing made that one word bear dig deeper than it usually did, like a nail finding an old crack in the wood. He nosed my elbow hard enough to slosh coffee over the rim of my mug. When I looked down, Ranger's eyes were wide and searching, like he expected me to answer a question he couldn't form. I chuckled, rubbing the warm fur at his neck, but the sound came out thin and bounced off the quiet kitchen walls. The humming fridge and the ticking clock over the sink suddenly sounded too loud, like they were trying to cover some other, softer noise neither of us could name. Outside, Hank's truck door slammed, and his boots crunched up my shoveled steps. Ranger's head snapped up. He moved to stand between me and the door before it opened, his body a taut line. For a heartbeat, as the knob turned and his hackles barely rose, a ridiculous thought flickered through me. What if my dog knew something I didn't, and whatever it was had finally decided to step out of the trees and onto my porch? Hank stomped snow from his boots and pushed inside without knocking, shaking the cold off his shoulders. "Mornin', Luke," he said, then stopped when he saw Ranger planted between us, every muscle wired. "Easy there, soldier. You forget which one of us feeds you." Ranger didn't blink, just flicked his eyes toward the bay-facing window and back again, like he was trying to herd Hank indoors as well. Hank followed his glance and grunted. "Carla call you yet?" They picked up something on the shoreline cameras last night. Big white something. He set a paper sack of mail on my table. Envelopes crinkling. Town board wants all dogs leashed in daylight until they know what's moving around out there. Last thing they need is somebody's pet chasing a bear onto Main Street. His tone tried to be casual. It didn't quite make it. I poured another mug and slid it his way. Carla texted, "Early tracks." That's all she said. Outside the window, Ranger pressed his nose to the glass, fogging a small circle as he breathed. He was up all night from the look of his blanket. I added, "Must be smelling something we can't." Hank shrugged, but I saw the way his eyes lingered on Ranger's stiff tail, the way his jaw worked. As Hank left for the docks, Carla called, her voice thin over the spotty reception. "We've got a sow collared north of you. Tag A17, she said. Her last ping shows her closer to town than normal. Could be she's following the ice edge in. Could be she's hungry." She paused. "I know Ranger's solid around wildlife, but keep him tight. The new ordinance is serious. One wrong move near a protected bear, and they'll come down on him hard." After the call, I clipped Ranger's leash and stepped onto the porch. He pulled me not toward his usual trail behind the cabin, but downhill, toward the line where the last houses gave way to scrub and the wide sheet of bay ice. At the edge of my property, He stopped dead, nose high, chest expanding in slow, deliberate breaths, tasting something on the brittle air. I saw nothing, but my skin prickled. We did a slow loop through town. Snowbanks piled taller than Ranger along the sidewalks. Outside the grocery, Mrs. Klein called from her car. Window cracked. "Luke, you hear about the bear?" she asked. They had something on the morning radio. Said if we see anything big and white that isn't a truck, we stay inside and call it in. She gave Ranger a worried look. "You keep that boy home." "You hear?" Were too small for headlines. On the way back, a pair of teenagers buzzed past on a snow machine, laughing too loudly. Ranger tensed as exhaust blew over us, then whipped his head toward the bluff where the bay dropped away. A gust rode up from the ice, a cold different from simple winter cold, and a faint, salty musk slid across my tongue. Ranger leaned into his harness, not forward but sideways, placing himself between me and the scent. I felt absurdly shielded. That night, the wind rose, rattling the loose gutters and moaning in the eaves. Ranger refused his usual spot by the wood stove and lay instead facing the door, ears twitching at every drift of snow against the porch. Twice, I caught him glancing from me to the window where a sliver of bay ice showed. By the time I turned out the last light, the shape of the problem had settled in my chest. My dog wasn't just nervous. He was watching for something, and I had no idea what I was supposed to do when it arrived. Ranger hadn't always been mine, and this stretch of coast hadn't always been home. Before the cabin, before the endless white, there'd been steel decks and salt spray and the sharp smell of diesel from Coast Guard boats cutting through black water. It'd done 15 years out there, chasing storms instead of avoiding them, until my knees started talking louder than the waves. When my wife died and the ocean stopped feeling like purpose and started feeling like punishment, I came north. I first met Ranger in a hangar 3 towns inland, at a canine training facility full of echoing barks and the clank of kennel doors. Head already put in his time as a military detection dog. Nose trained for explosives. Nerves frayed from years of alarms and concrete. The handler told me he was too sharp for a city backyard and too trained to waste. I watched him sit, trembling with stillness, eyes glued to her hand, and something in that tension felt familiar. The first winter we shared the cabin, he startled at every backfiring truck and slammed door. More than once, I woke to his weight pinning my chest, his nose shoved against my neck, panting like the world had ended and I hadn't noticed. Outside, the aurora would be dancing green over the frozen bay, the sky so wide it hurt. I'd lie there with my heart hammering, hand buried in his fur. Both of us convincing ourselves we were somewhere safer than where we'd been. Our first encounter with a bear came in the second year, during a late freeze. He'd left a trash bag too close to the shed, and Ranger's frantic barking dragged me to the back window. A big pale shape moved at the far edge of my floodlight, shoulders rolling, fur glowing dull yellow in the cone of light. My mouth went dry. Ranger didn't lunge or snap. He planted himself between me and the door, barking in a rhythm that felt more like warning than attack. Carla and her team checked the tracks the next day, measuring stride, talking quietly with that tight concern wildlife folks get. She came close. Carla said, straightening, closer than they usually like to. You're lucky your dog held the line. She ruffled Ranger's ear. Some bark and chase. And that's how people get hurt. This one chose you over his teeth. Her words lodged in me like a small anchor. We were a pair, both wired for alarms, both learning to hold steady. Years stacked up, marked by winters, thaw, and the slow aging of the town around us. Ranger learned the smells of moose and fox, the distant rumble of logging trucks, the pattern of mail deliveries. He knew the sound of my bad knee on the stairs and the exact squeak of the third porch board. When Carla needed someone to spot for her crew during coastal patrols, she called me. Because I had a clear view of the bay and because I had a dog that listened to the world. Then came the spring storm 3 years back, the one that took out half the dock. He'd been out helping tie down a neighbour's boat when a gust caught the pier, dumping me sideways onto slick planks. My legs skidded toward open water, and for one sliding breath, I felt nothing underneath me. Ranger's teeth caught my jacket sleeve, jerking me back hard enough to bruise my ribs. It wasn't dramatic. No headlines. No witnesses, just us, gasping in the cold rain, aware we'd just crossed the thin line. After that, folks started calling Ranger the watchman. He rode shotgun on my maintenance runs, lay under the church basement tables during community meetings, and settled in the corner of the small clinic when they needed a calm dog for anxious kids. Still, there was always a space in him that stayed on alert, nose tilted toward the bay. Whatever had trained him before me had taught him that danger didn't always come with sirens. Sometimes it moved silent, white on white, and you only got one chance to notice. The weather reports turned strange before anything else did. Carla's voice crackled over the radio one afternoon while I was changing a light bulb in the school gym. Luke, you at the cabin tonight? She asked. A 17 collar has been pinging in a tight circle near the edge of the bay. Could be a glitch. Could be she's holed up. Either way, we'd like eyes from your porch. You mind keeping watch? I could hear typing and low muttering behind her words. I drove home through early dusk. Headlights painting the snowbanks blue. Ranger paced the length of the porch as I pulled in, nails clicking faster than usual. When I opened the truck door, he launched himself into my lap instead of hopping down to the ground, then twisted to stare past me toward the dark line of ice. "Easy, boy," I murmured, but my fingers tightened around his collar. He trembled once, sharply, then went still. Inside, the radio murmured with weather updates while I checked windows and the old rifle I kept locked. More habit than intent. Ranger's toys lay where Head dropped them, but his stainless steel bowl sat untouched, full from the morning. He moved from door to window, window to door, pausing each time with his nose a breath away from the glass, breathing slow and attentive. Whatever he was smelling, it wasn't just cold. It was specific. Just after 9, the landline rang, a sound so rare these days it made both of us jump. It was the school principal, voice apologetic. The town board was holding an emergency meeting in the church basement to go over the New Bear ordinance, and they wanted me there as the dog handler presence. Someone had complained about an off-leash dog near the shoreline that afternoon. The description sounded uncomfortably like Ranger's. "I had him on leash all day," I said, eyes sliding to where Ranger now lay with his head on his paws, ears still pricked. "We didn't go near the bluff." The principal sighed. "I know. Luke. But people are nervous. A17 seconds been seen closer in, and the news keeps running those stories from other towns where it went bad. Just show your face. Answer a few questions. It'll help." It wasn't really a request. I hesitated, hand wrapped around the phone cord, heart tugged between duty and the restless dog at my feet. Ranger stood when I did, following every step like a shadow, nudging my hip when I reached for my coat. At the door, he stopped dead and looked back toward the bay, giving a single, low chuff that wasn't quite a bark. It sounded like disagreement, and for a moment, I nearly listened. In the end, I clipped his leash and brought him with me. The church basement smelled of coffee, wet wool, and old hymnals, folding chairs set in careful rows. Ranger settled against my leg, eyes scanning the room, while Carla stood at the front with a map of town tacked to the wall. Red circles showed recent sightings. One ring sat almost on top of my property. "She's not acting aggressive," Carla told the group. Laser pointer steady. "She's just closer than usual, and we don't know why." Questions flew, sharp but not hostile. Would kids still be allowed to walk to school? What about garbage pickup? Someone asked whether dogs should be kept in at night. Carla's gaze flicked to Ranger. Well-trained dogs on leash can be an early warning, she said. But chasing bears is illegal and dangerous. If your dog charges a sow with cubs, the law will treat that as harassment of a protected animal. Her meaning was clear. One bad incident, and Ranger's future could shrink fast. On the drive home, Ranger whined in the back seat as we neared the turnoff to the cabin. A thin sound I'd only heard from him during thunderstorms. Snow spiraled in my headlights, and the bay beyond the trees looked like nothing but darkness and shine. I told myself the meeting had rattled me, that I was projecting human worry onto a dog who merely smelled wind. Still, when we climbed the porch steps, I paused and listened, the way he always did, trying to hear whatever had his attention. 2 mornings later, the sky cracked open, clear and sharp, the kind of brittle blue that usually meant steady weather. I woke before the alarm to the sound of Ranger's claws skittering on the wood floor. He paced from bed to window to door, nails clicking a restless rhythm. When he saw my eyes open, he let out a single, urgent bark, a sound he reserved for more than squirrels or delivery trucks. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and felt the cold bite through my socks. Out on the bay, the ice shone pink with early light. Ranger hovered at the door, body low, tail stiff, glancing between me and the porch like there was a schedule we were already late for. The landline began to ring, a desperate jangle that ran straight up my spine. I grabbed it on the second ring. "Luke." "It's Carla," came the breathless voice. "We've lost a 17 seconds cub signal." The collar on the little one went still sometime in the night. The sow's been pacing a tight circle on the tracker, and she's headed your direction now. We've got a team suiting up, but the road out to you is slick as glass. Stay inside. Keep Ranger calm. And if you see her, call it in before you do anything else. My mind produced a picture before I could stop it. A big white bear, ribs pressing the fur from beneath, nose lifted, confused without the cub shed been following since early winter. "You think she's dangerous?" I asked. Carla hesitated. "She's a mother who thinks she lost her baby," she said. "That's its own kind of dangerous. Just be my eyes. Okay. And whatever you do, don't let your dog get between them." Ranger whined as I hung up, then trotted to the back door, the one that opened toward the small clearing and the knob of rock where I could usually see half the bay. He pawed twice, then stepped back, looking up at me with a mix of urgency and pleading that I'd only ever seen on him during rescues. The leash hung on its hook. I took it down out of habit, but his body language said there wasn't time for the usual routine. We made it as far as the truck before plans changed. He'd thought to drive up the road to a higher lookout, but as soon as the engine turned over, Ranger scrambled toward the passenger window, nails dragging on the dashboard, nose jammed against the glass. He gave a sharp, staccato bark toward the stand of birch between my cabin and Hank's. Something moved there, just beyond sight, snow shifting in a long, slow line. I killed the engine and stepped out into the still morning. The only sounds were the faint creak of tree trunks in the cold and Ranger's breathing. He circled once, then positioned himself in front of my legs, facing the birch stand, head low but steady. A moment later, Hank's voice floated over from his porch. "You see her?" he called. "Tone too loud for the quiet. Town radio says she's off the bay, moving between houses." Before I could answer, the first siren wailed faintly from town. Not the screaming city kind, but the warbling rise and fall of the volunteer fire engine. It carried on the frozen air, strange and far away. Somewhere behind it, I heard another sound, the low beep of a truck backing up. Shouts, the muffled clank of gear. The public part of whatever was happening had begun, whether I stepped into it or not. A pickup slid around the bend, tires crunching, wildlife stenciled on the side. Carla leaned out the passenger window, her orange hat bright against the snow. "Luke, we're staging here," she said, gesturing toward my driveway. "School cancelled. People told to stay inside. We need a clear line of sight if she cuts through." Her eyes flicked to Ranger. "Can you keep him close?" "Hess steady. But one wrong move and the cameras in town will be all over it." Within minutes, my quiet clearing turned into a small, tense camp. Carla's team unfolded tripods and loaded darts, murmuring into radios. Hank hovered near my porch with a pair of binoculars, scarf crooked. A local reporter I recognized from the town paper climbed from her car, camera hanging from her neck, breath puffing in white bursts. Ranger stayed pressed to my leg, gaze fixed on the trees, ignoring the new human smells and sounds. Snow sloughed from a branch at the edge of the clearing, pattering softly onto the crust below. Ranger stiffened, a tremor running from his nose to his tail. "She's here," I whispered, though I still saw nothing but white and shadow. Carla raised a hand, and conversations cut off mid-word. The reporter lifted her camera, lens already pointed where Ranger's eyes were locked. Whatever was about to happen wasn't going to stay between me and the bear. The birch trunks parted as if the woods themselves were taking a breath. She stepped out, larger than memory, fur the colour of old snow in the early light. A 17 seconds collar flashed dull green at her neck with each slow movement. Her head hung low, shoulders rolling, and in her jaws, clamped carefully between teeth that could crack bone, a small, limp bundle of white fur dangled by the scruff. The cub looked wrong in the golden light. Too still, too quiet. For one frozen heartbeat, all motion stopped. No one spoke. No cameras clicked. Even the wind seemed to hold. Ranger inhaled, long and deliberate, then moved. He slipped ahead of me in a low, controlled trot, placing his body squarely between my legs and the bear's steady approach. His tail was neither high nor tucked, just level. Every line of him saying not attack, not retreat, but wait. The reporter's shutter snapped softly. Once, twice. Luke, call him back, Carla hissed, barely louder than the air moving through her teeth. If he spooks her, her words trailed off as a 17 stopped at the edge of the clearing. The bear's dark eyes flicked from Ranger to me and back, nostrils flaring, breath pluming. She took one careful step forward, cub swinging gently, then another. Pause, soundless on the snow. Ranger didn't growl. He lowered his head a fraction, as if acknowledging a line neither of them could cross without changing everything. I felt my own instincts fighting, training that said to retreat, to get behind a wall, to load a rifle if I had one, battling with the deep, inexplicable trust it built with the dog in front of me. Easy, boy, I breathed, the words more for myself than for him. Ranger flicked an ear back at my voice, then glanced over his shoulder, eyes locking with mine for a split second. It was the same look Head given me on the dock before Head hauled me away from the edge. The cub's collar blinked a weak, irregular light, half buried in matted fur, as A17 shifted her jaw. I saw a thin strand of torn netting looped tight around the little bear's shoulder, digging into swollen skin. The limpness wasn't just sleep. The cub was in trouble, and its mother had carried it toward the only cluster of humans she'd ever seen who hadn't shot at her. The realization ran through me like a live current. She hadn't come to attack. She'd come to ask, in the only language she had, for help. Ranger took a single step forward, still blocking me, but his posture changed, the hard edge melting into something he'd seen before around injured fawns and frightened children. He let out one soft, breathy woof, not the sharp alarm bark he used for danger. A 17 huffed, a sound deep and rough, then lowered her massive head until the cub hung almost at his eye level. They were close enough that I could have reached out and touched both, if it'd been foolish enough to try. Behind us, someone whispered. Is she showing it to him? The reporter's camera began clicking again. Fast now. The tiny machines sound absurdly small in the presence of so much wild muscle. Carla's hand, holding the dart rifle, trembled just enough for me to see. If we sedate her now, Shell, drop the cub, she murmured. If we wait, she might bolt. Every option held weight. None felt exactly right. Ranger made the choice for us. He eased sideways, still between me and the bear, but opening a narrow channel between himself and the porch steps. Eyes cutting to me, then to the vet tech standing with a tranquilizer kit at the ready. It was the same move he used at the clinic door when he wanted a nervous kid to walk between him and the wall. A corridor of trust. Somehow, impossibly, he was offering the same to a wild mother. Luke, Carla said quietly, if you're going to move, now's the time. My legs felt carved from ice, but I stepped into the line Ranger had given me. Slow and deliberate. 17 seconds had lifted an inch, muscles tensing, then eased again when Ranger shifted to stay exactly centered between us. Good girl, I said without thinking, voice shaking. You're all right. We see her. We see her. It wasn't the words she understood. It was the tone, the steadiness borrowed from my dog. The vet tech knelt just inside the cabin's shadow. Hands sure as she slid a pole with a looped cutter toward the cub's shoulder, keeping her body behind the porch post. A 17 rumbled once, warning deep and low, but she didn't move, her eyes never leaving Ranger's. He stood like a bridge made of fur and bone and trust, breathing slow, letting her read him. With a careful snip and a tug, the netting dropped free from the cub's swollen flesh. Back, Carla called softly, raising the dart gun only when the tech had retreated. A 17 watched us for a long, measuring moment, then shifted her grip. Cub still limp but no longer pinched. Ranger stepped back in sync with her, never turning his head away until she was at the edge of the clearing. Only then did he glance up at me, as if to say, there. That was the part that belonged to us. The rest is hers. When Carla's dart finally thumped harmlessly into a snowbank, the collective exhale from the humans around us was as loud as any siren. Later, in the clinic waiting room, video from the reporter's camera played on a looping screen. The shaky footage already sent to regional news. It showed Ranger jumping between me and the bear, the cub hanging from her jaws. The moment when every person there expected teeth and chaos and instead watched a domestic dog and a wild predator negotiate a fragile, perfect truce. I've never seen anything like that, Carla said voice hushed. Everyone's going to know his name now. Luke. And maybe hers too. In the days that followed, town life bent itself around what had happened in my clearing. The paper ran a front-page story with a still frame of Ranger and a 17 facing each other, the cub's limp body between them. People who'd once crossed the street to avoid walking too near my intense dog now stopped to pat his flank, fingers brushing his collar like it was a medal. Ranger accepted it all with the same calm curiosity he brought to everything, eyes always drifting back toward the bay. The cub spent a week in a quiet pen behind the clinic, swelling slowly, easing under careful hands. Children from the school drew crayon pictures of a big white bear and a brown dog standing together in the snow, taping them to the lobby walls. During visiting hours, under strict supervision, a few families watched through thick glass as the little bear blinked groggily and nosed at its food. Ranger lay in the hallway, chin on his paws, tail thumping each time the cub shifted. At the next community meeting in the church basement, the folding chairs filled quickly. Carla played a short clip from the reporter's footage, pausing on the frame where Ranger opened that narrow corridor between bear and humans. "We brought laws here for good reasons," she said, gesturing to the map with its red circles. "But sometimes it's not about fear. It's about listening." That dog read the situation better than most of us did at first. We owe him, and that's so. A little more faith. Heads nodded in the fluorescent light. Afterward, Mrs. Klein pressed a tin of cookies into my hands. "For both of you," she said, eyes shining. I was one of the ones who worried about him around my grandkids. I saw the video. Luke, he knew what he was doing. Not just protecting you, but making space for her to trust you. Ranger sniffed the tin politely, then leaned into her knee until she laughed. Tension breaking like thin ice under a warm sun. The cub returned to a 17 on a foggy morning when the bay lay hidden under a soft grey curtain. From the bluff near my cabin, we watched Carlos team ferry the groggy youngster across the ice in a sled, keeping respectful distance. Ranger stood pressed against the snow fence, ears forward, as the mother bear emerged from the mist, larger than life once more. She rumbled low when the sled slid within reach, then carefully lifted her cub and turned back into the haze. Ranger whined softly, a farewell that wasn't for us. After that, my routines with Ranger found a new rhythm. We still walked the edge of town, still checked on elderly neighbours and faulty furnaces. But now there were pauses where people wanted to talk about bears and fear and the thin lines that separated one life from another. Ranger sat patiently through it all, occasionally resting his head on a shaking hand, usually before I saw the tears in someone's eyes. had become a kind of bridge in more ways than one. On quiet evenings, when the weather held and the bay lay smooth and dull under the fading light, he'd catch him standing alone on the porch, nose angled toward the north. Sometimes, far out where ice met open water, a pale moving dot would track along the horizon, too distant for real detail. I like to imagine it was a 17 and her cub, moving in wary peace. We did all right by them. Huh. Boy, it'd say. Ranger's tail would give a single, thoughtful wag, as if agreeing that, for once, we'd gotten the balance right. Winter softened its grip by inches, trading blizzards for dripping eaves and patches of exposed gravel on the road into town. The story from my clearing made a brief splash on regional television, then faded under fresher headlines, as everything does. But in our small slice of coast, it settled into the soil like a seed. People salted their steps more carefully, kept lids tight on trash cans, and spoke about bears with a little less trembling and a little more respect. Ranger simply kept watching. On the first truly warm evening of spring, golden light pooled across the porch boards, turning Ranger's coat into a burnished, living thing. I sat on the top step with a mug of coffee gone cool, my bad knee stretched out, listening to the distant thrum of a snow machine making one last run over tired snow. The radio on the crate beside me crackled, Carla's voice coming through. Collar 17 pinged clear of town. She reported. She and the cub are moving north, steady and healthy. Thought you'd want to know. I clicked the radio off and let the quiet settle back in. Ranger padded over and lowered himself at my side, shoulder pressed against my leg with that solid, wordless assurance head offered from the day we met. A few loose hairs lifted in the soft breeze, catching the light before drifting away. Somewhere out on the darkening bay, life wed touched but never owned, moved under its own power, wild and intact. I scratched the spot behind his ear that always made his eyes half close. You know, I said softly, if you hadn't stepped between us that morning, it'd have missed what she was asking for. It'd have seen a threat, not a mother. Ranger sighed. The long, contented sound of a dog who has finally put down a load he carried for too long. His head settled on my knee, the weight of it both anchor and comfort. The sun slid lower, painting the snow patches gold and the bay a deep, quiet blue. I thought of steel decks and lost storms, of empty rooms and nights when the wind had sounded like nothing but absence. Then I thought of a brown dog standing between me and a polar bear, choosing not just to protect, but to connect. My throat tightened, but the feeling was warm. I'm glad we found each other. I'm not alone anymore. I whispered. Ranger's tail thumped once, slow and sure, like a promise. If this story touched your heart, drop a simple 1 in the comments to let us know you were here. Your support keeps these gentle stories alive. Don't forget to subscribe and stay with us, because the next story might just be the one that finds you when you least expect it.